Okay, hello everybody. This is Mark Hunter from Mark of Approval Web and Marketing, and in today's session I would like to talk about the importance of setting up WordPress with a domain name and hosting and how you go about doing that. So this is the first session of a few modules I'll be doing, and I'll be putting these out for people to view for free. And without anything else to say, let's get into the meat of the content. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is registering your domain. The important thing is to choose a domain name. Now, choosing a domain name is extremely important because once you've got the domain name, you're pretty much stuck with it once you become established. So for me, my domain name is markofapproval.com. I'm quite happy with it, but at the same time, if I wasn't happy with it, it'd be really hard to rebrand. So here's some free recommendations that you could use to choose your domain name. One could be based on your business name. Like mine's Mark of Approval Web and Marketing, so I'll shorten it to markofapproval.com. Another could be based on your own name. I mean, I'd have a hard time getting markhunter.com because it's a very common name, but at the same time, a lot of people do have unusual names or names that aren't quite common and are able to snatch those up in the domain space. One example that comes to mind is Evan Pag, and I believe he actually says his name is quite unusual, and because of that, he's able to, snatch it up and register that domain name. It could even be based on a keyword. Now, I'm going to give you some more examples of some real sites that do this. Firstly, here's my site here. I have registered, as I said, my domain name is registered to my business, so markofapproval.com. And at that, having said that, the best thing to do is to get a .com. If somebody else at markofapproval.com, for example, and I register markofapproval.net, and if I said to somebody here, come visit my website, it's markofapproval.net, they might think inside their head that it's markofapproval.com and then go to my competitor's site. So that's why it's good to have the .com. So for this next example, it's a good friend of mine, Susan O'Day of Website Designs Australia. She's actually called her business name and her domain name the same thing, which is also a keyword. And I believe that can actually help her get a lot of traffic. So it's a very good move on her part. And my other friend, Angela Wills, she has registered angelawills.com. So this is her way of using her personal branding, her personal name, into a domain name. So there are those 3 examples that you can check out. And of course, there's plenty more. There's armandmorn.com is a personal name for a well-known marketer, and the list goes on. So to get your domain name, which is like an address on the web, you first have to go and buy it from a domain registrar. And when I say buy it, it's more like renting the address. So there's a few places you can go to get domain names, and you can also search for if they're available. For example, I couldn't get something like amazon.com, it's not available. Obviously, that's Amazon's domain name. So they do have to be available, and especially at them in .com. So if we look here, we have Namecheap. It's my recommended domain name provider. I think Namecheap is really good because they're about $12, I think, for a .com domain for a year, I believe. But they give you almost all you need to work with it. And they don't actually hold back any upsells, which is really recommended in my case. GoDaddy, on the other hand, I believe you can get a 99-cent domain name, but there's a lot of catches, I believe. It's good when getting started. Your very first domain name you can get really cheap. I've also noticed in the past, GoDaddy was actually the first domain name provider that I used, and because of that, well, not because of that, but rather what I found was they had a very complicated system for managing that domain name. So Namecheap's very basic with how you manage it. Other ones I can't recommend, but I can actually suggest that they're out there. There's Net Registry and there's Crazy Domains. So there's a few others for you. Here's some do's and don'ts for choosing your domain name. Do. register a .com where possible. As I suggested before, if you register a .net, people get confused and go to the .com version. And if that's your competitor, then you've possibly just lost, for example, a keyword domain, you possibly just lost your rank to a competitor. Be aware that there's a price constructed for a domain name. Now, for example, in Australia, a .com.au domain name, I think cost about $20 per year, if I'm not mistaken, or was it for 2 years? But some domain registrars will actually add on their own fee on top of that. I know there's one notorious Australian company that actually adds its own fee, which is actually 3 times as much as the domain name on top of that. So it's like a 400% markup. So just be aware that domain names are relatively cheap. It's just a matter of the services that happen in between and the markup that the registrar puts on top of it. If you want to find the domain name, here's another do. Use a secure service like instantdomainchecker.com. What that will do is it'll allow you to type a domain name in real time, and while you're typing it in, it will check to see if the domain name is available. Now, what I like about this is you can actually type a domain name that won't be available and then consider putting an extension on the end of it. For example, if you wanted, let's say, a keyword domain like drink coffee, you could have drink coffee club and try different variations of that until you find one that's available. Drink coffee boulevard, I don't know, just silly names that they can come up with, but it should be small, memorable, and not so big that it's hard to type in. Now, when I say secure, I mean it's HTTPS. So let's just go to Instant Domain Checker now. It was an Instant Domain Search. I might have gotten the wrong one. It's Instant Domain Search, that's right. So I have to fix that up. But basically, I can type in a keyword like, let's see a good keyword, lose weight. And in real time, it tells me that's not available. It's in red, it's not available. I could say lose weight club, which is not available. Lose weight happy, not available. So you can actually see, just start typing them in, it'll go green. But here's the HTTPS up here. Now what that signifies is that people cannot see what you're typing in and they cannot go, like a robot might be monitoring what you're typing in if it's not HTTPS, if it's just HTTP. And that way they can actually find a good domain name that you actually look for and register it before you. So that's why it's important to have the HTTPS there. Let's continue. Here's some don'ts. I suggest you don't do this, and or try to avoid it, is packaging the domain and host together. For example, GoDaddy offers domain names and hosting in the same package. There's a few problems there. Number one, if the company blows up, then you've lost both your host and your domain name. Number two, one other issue I can think about is sometimes they bundle the domain name and you don't know who owns that domain name. I bought a domain name once, a really good one. In hindsight, probably not that good, but I think it was howdoimakeagame.com. And I bought it through a domain provider who was actually a host, and they actually said for the first year, or for however long you have the hosting with us, you have the domain name. So my domain name was therefore tied to the hosting, which is really tricky. Don't feel the need to buy all the extensions either. Some hosting companies will tell you you have to buy the .net, the .com, the .org, the .name, the .info, and the list goes on. In my opinion, that's just a way of making more money, a money grab. And yes, there are times you might want to protect your brand, but when you're starting out, I really don't think you need to go any further beyond the .com, because most people only think of the .com anyway. Don't talk about your domain name publicly before registering it. I think that goes without saying. I've seen in a few groups, people actually say, is this a good domain name? And what I really love about these groups is some people come and say, hey, I'll PM you a good domain name that I think will help, as opposed to just placing it in a Facebook group where everybody can see it and fuss, register it and sell it to you again. So it's just a good safeguard. So let's look at some considerations when choosing a domain name. It's probably best if you can keep your domain in one place So all your domains. So if you have Namecheap like I do, I try and keep all my domains under Namecheap. So I only have to log into to Namecheap and see everything, and it's all in one place. This isn't always possible, especially when you're moving around domains, but just keep in mind that it's always a good idea to try and be organized. Consider when you purchase your domain name to purchase a Whois Shield Guard. I think that's what it's called, but basically it gives you privacy against people looking up your phone number and your mailing address and your email address. I never really thought this was important. I thought having a business meant you should be public, but what I found from experience is that I will get telemarketers calling me to try and sell me stuff because they know I've got the domain name. So it doesn't happen to me a lot, but it's a possibility. And consider allowing them to auto-renew. Now here's my Namecheap account. If you look here, I have auto-renewed on. So when this domain's about to expire, it'll automatically renew it. Therefore, I don't have to worry about losing my domain name. I believe when a domain name does expire, you have about 45 or 30 days to reclaim it. After that, you have to pay a big fee, and there's a possibility somebody else will snatch it up. I'm pretty positive my domain names would get snatched up because, well, I not to brag, but I think they're pretty good domain names. So I don't want to lose them. Now let's move on to hosting providers. Here we're going to look at some hosting companies. The one I recommend is SiteGround. SiteGround is really awesome. They got great support. I think they're an Australian-based company, but they charge in either Australian or US dollars. I think they, depending on where you are. You can choose where your server is, whether it's in England, not England, let's think, Central Europe, America, or Southeast Asia. So you can do a lot of things with SiteGround, and as I said, the support's just phenomenal. It's just excellent. Another one of excellent support is Liquidware. A little bit more expensive, but I still recommend them. There's also HostGator. They used to be pretty big on the block when they first started out, but there has been a bit of, I believe Bluehost and HostGator are owned by the same people, and there's been a little bit of talk of perhaps a decline in customer service there and hard to get onto them. But they are affordable. And there's GoDaddy, of course. So here's SiteGround. This is where you sign up for SiteGround. I would recommend you start at the Grow Big. If you start here, you can only have one website. That's one domain name, like markofapproval.com. I couldn't have webmentor.com. I couldn't have markofapproval.com.au. I couldn't have moademo.com on that because I can only choose one of them. But if I go for the Grow Big, I can choose all of them. The good thing about SiteGround also is that it limits the amount of visitors you can get. And you might think that's silly. You might think it shouldn't be unlimited. But what this actually proves is that they've got a dedication to keeping the bandwidth of the sites on the shared server, and that's what it is, a shared server, to a minimum. So there's not one person hogging all the resources. A lot of these domain hosting providers, pardon me, will actually say, you can have unlimited traffic. But that's not fair on the rest of the people on the system because then it slows their sites down if something happens to your site or you get a lot of traffic influx. So here's some tips for choosing a web host. Keep the future in mind. So you want to make sure you can scale up and that you don't, for example, let's look at some of the things I mean by this. You want to look at your uptime. It should have a 99% or around there uptime, maybe 97% uptime. There's no such thing as 100% uptime. All servers will go down occasionally. You've got to be prepared for that. You also got to be careful if they're on a shared resources system. Most of them are starting out, but it's not a bad thing. It just means the prices are generally cheaper, but at the same time, if there's too many on the same server, the same computer that hosts the files, as I said before, you're going to have a bottleneck of traffic from other people's sites that also affect yours. And you want tools, say you can install WordPress like PHP 5, MySQL. I think it's is it 5 point something or rather 5.3 or that's PHP. Anyway, I can't remember the exact versions, but I do know that you need PHP, MySQL, and just the ability to install WordPress in general. So do they allow multiple domains to be hosted? I just noted that before, that some of the starting plans don't. And that's why they get you to buy the next plan up, because they actually do allow you to host multiple domains. And as I said, be wary of unlimited bandwidth. What I've noticed a few of my clients doing is they'll have one shared hosting account of their own, and they'll place in a lot of their own domain names, maybe 20 of their domain names. Each domain name has a website, obviously, attached to it. That's also problematic because it drains the resources, the CPU, the memory, the bandwidth that can be available. So just keep in mind that it's not only other people on the shared hosting environment, it's also your own websites. What I like to do for my own site, this marketapproval.com, because this is my important main site, I have a host all to itself. And then when I develop sites for clients, I'll use another hosting account to develop those sites. So I'm not actually using the same resources and hogging up this resource for it. Again, choose a host that has cPanel. cPanel is important. It's pretty much the standard these days, and it's easy to use. If you don't have cPanel as your control backend to everything you do, for example, moving files, setting up FTP accounts, checking databases, then number one, you're not going to be able to get as much help easily. Number two, if you hire a freelancer, then you need to get a special freelancer and they might cost more. Number three, it's just going to be a lot harder to get documentation on. If it's a homebrew cPanel, so just make sure it's cPanel like this. It's just easiest I can suggest. Now your work isn't done once you've bought the domain name and the hosting. You have to connect them together. You have to tell the address where the server is. So you have to connect the two. What you're basically doing is going to log into your domain name area, like Namecheap, and telling it the address of the server. So it points. So markupapproval.com will point to the IP address or the computer jargon, whatever you want to call it, that I'll show you what it looks like shortly, but it'll point to it. It might be ns1.siteground.com, ns2.siteground.com, etc. And there's one thing to note here. There's something called propagation, which means when you actually do connect up your name, your markupapproval.com to the server, which is SiteGround, it'll take 72 hours up to actually become known across the world as being tied together. There's also some resources you can use to check which places in the world actually seeing your site proper. Here are some things to note. You are not changing ownership or propagating your domain name server. So by tying the two together, you're not actually saying, I'm giving markupapproval.com to SiteGround. You're just connecting them together. You can reconnect them as many times as you wish to other, like if I buy a new server with HostGator, I might want to change my name servers to HostGator's name servers so it connects to HostGator. But the point is, you can do it as many times as you want. It still takes 24 to 72 hours to become visible. But in that time, you just have to be patient and wait and make minimal changes that are going to affect everybody. And one thing I want to mention is that there's a transfer option. If you buy your domain name of GoDaddy and you want to transfer it to Namecheap, so you want to take ownership of GoDaddy as being looked after, ownership of markupapproval.com, which is with Namecheap, and I want to say Namecheap's giving me whatever the word would be, I don't want to use a bad word while I'm teaching, but not that they ever would, because they're really good, but let's say I want to move to another name provider and just give them ownership of the reins. There's a 90-day lockout period when you first buy a domain name. That means if I buy a new domain name with SiteGround, I cannot change it to another domain register within 90 days, before 90 days is up. I believe this is a security thing to protect you against people stealing your domain names, which is not a bad thing, but it just means if you're going to register a domain name, make sure you register with who you want it to be registered with. So, and also know, this is the other thing. When I first, my very first site was with GoDaddy years ago, and I had the domain name and the hosting with GoDaddy. What I actually thought, this was probably about 2005, so far back, I actually thought that this meant, the 9-day window meant I could not go to another host because GoDaddy's hosting wasn't cutting it for me. That's not true. You can still propagate to another host. You just can't say that you want GoDaddy to give up control of your domain name and hand it over to somebody else like SiteGround. Namecheap. Yeah, you get the point. So let's look at some resources now. What is my DNS? It's the first resource I want to look at. If I am propagating my domain name, for example, if I have marketapproval.com, I can look up the record. For example, the A record, which thinks the IP address. We just think, is that right? We'll see, yep. And it'll tell me this is my IP address all over the world. It's tied to the same IP address, which is good. There's a few places that aren't coming up, and that's not uncommon. I found even the oldest domains don't always register in certain places. Like Bangkok and Thailand, the true internet provider can't see my domain name. But this resource will allow you to see the progress. Name servers. So you can see they're all registered with SiteGround. And that's the name server I gave to Namecheap when I registered and I told it to point to SiteGround. So if this was all randomly chosen values, like they were different, it would mean it's still propagating. We've looked at instant domain search. And name mesh, if you want to come up with a good business name or domain name, whatever, name mesh is another great resource that will help you choose. For example, choose what we spoke about before, lose weight. Enter it in and see what it comes up with. You'll find the ones that are available. Hide registered. So the green ones, I believe, are ones that are free. So for SEO, you could say try loseweight.com. Then you could go to instant domain, say, and then you see it's available. Of course, not all domain names are good, but this is just a way of finding some domain names that you might like. So what I invite you now to do, if you enjoyed this training, is to go to my website, and I have an offer for you. And when it's an offer, it's actually a free newsletter. And I'll be sharing more WordPress tips with you, very small bite-sized chunks that you can actually read weekly. And there's really nothing to them. They're good, valuable information, and they won't take a lot of time to read. I highly recommend you check it out. I'll give you the URL in the description below. And if you're interested, just sign up and I'll see you on the other side there. Again, thank you for listening to this training. I appreciate having you with me and look forward to seeing you again. Bye for now.